Hello and welcome to Audiobook Reviews. In this video, I'll be discussing Emperor of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. First off, I just have to say, wow. I came into this trilogy not having any background on what it was about or on Mark Lawrence's writing style at all. This is the first piece of work I've read by him, and I certainly have to say I have been thoroughly impressed. Throughout the trilogy, we follow Jorg from around 10 years old up until he's 20 in the last book. And his life is very, very different over time. The first-person narration, along with the narrative choice to use flashbacks very heavily, told a unique story that keeps you guessing and very much, in my opinion, keeps you hooked. In this book, we jump forward a bit for the main chronology and see Jorg after defeating Arrow and conquering 6 other kingdoms. Of course, his eyes are on a bigger prize than that, as the title would tell you, the seat of the Emperor. That path to the Congression is of course dangerous and bloody, but Jorg also has challenges of a completely different kind, in that his new wife from the last book, Miana, is pregnant, carrying Jorg's son. Jorg's quote-unquote relationship with his father leaves him having no idea how to even be a father, and gives us an even deeper look into his thoughts and mind through this new avenue in his life. The flashback portions focus on the time after he left his grandfather's castle, and so it picks up pretty much where the flashbacks left off in book 2, and it shows how he found the body of Bruce and got the gun that we saw at the end of King of Thorns, and continues from there with his travels where he gains a much deeper understanding of the world around him. Flashbacks can easily become too heavy-handed and disrupt the narrative, but Lawrence weaves them in masterfully in these books. Books 2 and 3 seem to use an increased amount of flashbacks, interweaving explanations for pieces of the story we've seen the result of, and also giving the whole new narrative that took place in the past, yet still fits in perfectly into the ongoing story and the characters' motivations. Both timelines we follow continue the trend of the first 2 books of broadening the story as Jorg's goals and motivations are also broadened. In King of Thorns, Lawrence started to scratch the surface a bit more on the world of the past, but Emperor really brings this more to the forefront. We learn more about the past people, and also get additional sci-fi elements as we learn just a bit more about their technology, and start to see that the echoes of the past have their own motivations as well. This book also saw an increase in the amount of outside perspectives we see with the story. Previously we saw Catherine's journal, and now we see Chella's story also coming into play, tying in the overall Dead King story. On that note, Lawrence spends additional time often through those Chella passages, exploring the Dead King and his motivations more in this book, and both the technology of the past and the new phenomena of the Dead King play a huge role in the finale of the trilogy. Most of all, though, the story follows Jorg. What Lawrence has been able to do in crafting the character of Jorg is just astounding. We start with a young child who quickly learned the horrors of the world, just blindly lashing out, wanting nothing more than to fulfill his basest violent desires. We see Jorg grow, both physically and, though at a much slower pace, I will admit, emotionally. We witness his internal struggle, and we witness the deepest, darkest memories of his past. Jorg truly is a tortured soul, and while also being a terrible human being, honestly, you see flashes of what could be if things were different. Lawrence doesn't shy away from exploring his sordid past and the things he's done, and in turn had done to him, and never uses any of it as an excuse. Jorg is, well, Jorg, and his narrative viewpoint, seeing the world through his eyes, is what gives the Broken Empire its haunting but engrossing tone. Like the first 2 books, this is not for the faint of heart. As I mentioned, Lawrence does not shy from the darkness in these books at all. Wherever Jorg goes, darkness follows in these books. The trilogy has blood and gore, rape, death of children and animals, and somehow, Lawrence never makes it seem gratuitous. It's always there for a reason. It all encompasses who Jorg is, along with those he surrounds himself with. There's a scene in Emperor of Thorns where, without getting into spoilers, Jorg forces another character to witness one of his darkest memories, making them live it along with him. This, for me, was an apt metaphor for this series as a whole, and with the way the narrative is structured. While we sometimes hear from others, this is the story of Jorg, told by Jorg. He won't ever shy away from the details. He won't sugarcoat it. Jorg lived through it, and he wants to make you feel as if you're living it right along with him. Lawrence makes York feel extremely real, and that makes the hard passages harder. You aren't just an outside observer, you're a passenger along for the ride. Something else that is very important with any book, but especially with the last book in a trilogy or series, is the ending. Let me tell you, Mark Lawrence, in my opinion, stuck the landing. This whole trilogy was filled with so much action and crafted to carefully consider how much information you have at any moment. Through the main story and the flashbacks, you slowly get more and more of the picture, but at the same time, the action never stops. That said, this was a narrative where coming to a satisfying ending definitely could have caused issues. There were a lot of moving parts, and they all needed to come together. For me, they did. York, as I laid out in my look into his character, was complicated and had complicated motivations. It was hard to see how his story would end, and York himself probably didn't see the ending coming either. The ending, I feel like, was a great way to wrap up this story, and I think it will surprise most in a good way. I feel like I've rambled on long enough probably at this point, so as a final statement I'll say this. The Broken Empire trilogy was a great surprise. I've not read any grimdark fantasy that I've enjoyed more, and this series quickly brought Lawrence to my attention and has made it virtually impossible for me to not continue reading probably whatever he has out and writes. This is dark, but it's so much more than that. What Lawrence accomplished in this series definitely signifies a very bright future for him, in my opinion. With that said, that is my review of Emperor of Thorns, the final book in the Broken Empire trilogy. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like, and if you'd like to see more content like this, please feel free to subscribe.